Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're tackling something that on the surface feels pretty simple, but it really has the power to fundamentally reframe how we think about our communities, our economy even. We're diving into the surprisingly potent argument that housing, it isn't just a consumer product.
Right.
And it's definitely not just a speculative investment. The argument is that it's actually foundational infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
The sources we pulled for this deep dive, they really challenge an assumption.
A big one.
A huge one that stood for decades. So our mission today is to unpack this core question. Why do we treat housing so differently from, say, roads, water systems, the power grid?
Sewage,
exactly. And why, once you kind of step back and look at it, does that distinction start to feel, as the papers put it, conceptually unavoidable?
That's really the crux of it. This isn't about, picking a political winner or pushing for one specific policy.
Yeah.
It's about a conceptual shift. The analysis is asking us to just question the very categories we use to define what's necessary for a society.
Right.
And if we can get some clarity on what actually changes when you shift that label from market commodity to infrastructure, well, that clarity, it changes the whole debate.
Okay, so let's unpack this then. Let's use those established examples. When we talk about core infrastructure, roads, water, electricity, what's the basic agreement there? What really defines that category beyond, the obvious stuff like concrete and wires?
Well, the core agreement is that these are systems that society absolutely needs to function at all.
Right, just to operate on a basic level.
Exactly. Think of it as a settled consensus.
Mm-hmm.
In any modern society, we don't really debate whether we should have a sewage system or whether power lines should exist.
No, of course not.
The whole discussion just immediately shifts to implementation.
Where does it go?
Where does it go? How is it funded? How fast can we get it delivered? That's the conversation.
And what's crucial there, I think, is that we accept a public role in making sure it gets delivered. The outcome itself is public. You must have access to water, even if, say, private companies are involved in the construction or the day-to-day operation.
Absolutely. Infrastructure implies proactive planning, long-term coordination. You plan it based on forecasted need.
Mm-hmm.
It's the platform that everything else, commerce, health, education, it's all built on top of that.
Which, of course, immediately raises the question driving this whole deep dive. Why is housing the one thing you need to even settle in a place considered separate from that list?
It makes no sense. The functional logic for needing a home is, it's identical to the need for running water.
And when you start to really detail housing's actual functional role in society, that conceptual gap, it just becomes glaringly obvious. The source material really hammers this point home, that stable shelter isn't just an amenity, it's an operational requirement.
It's the critical first domino.
Yeah.
If you look at the immediate effects, the downstream effects,
Yeah.
the necessity is just undeniable. Without stable, accessible housing, people can't put down roofs.
Right.
Workers can't stay in their jobs or even live near their jobs. Families can't make long-term plans for, finances or schools. It destabilizes the entire labor market.
I found that analogy in the reading so powerful that once housing starts to wobble, everything built on top of it, the local economy, school outcomes, public health, it all starts to wobble too.
Yeah, it's like trying to build a skyscraper on quicksand. It just doesn't work.
Exactly.
And this is where the contrast in how we treat these things becomes so critical. When a power grid fails, we treat it like an immediate disabling crisis.
It's an emergency.
It's an emergency, a failure of governance or planning or maintenance. But when housing fails, when a major city has a chronic 10 or 20% housing shortage, we talk about it so differently.
How so?
We talk about it as if it's just unfortunate or, the inevitable result of tough market choices. We treat a systemic failure with a shrug.
We act like a housing shortage is just this force of nature, like a hurricane, instead of a failure of planning.
And that inaction has these severe consequences that ripple out everywhere. When shortages just keep going and stability goes down, the whole system, it just stiffens up. And think about the costs. A lack of housing strains, hospital budgets, it increases public safety costs, it undermines schools. We are paying the price for this shortage.
We're just paying for it in the most expensive roundabout way possible.
Yes.
And it also limits personal freedom, right? If a move across town feels just prohibitively risky because you might not find a place to live, then people just stay put, even in a bad situation.
They absolutely do. Change feels expensive. And that dynamism that you need for a healthy economy where workers can move to where the jobs are, It just freezes up because staying put, even in a bad job, feels like the safest option compared to the gamble of entering this hyper-competitive, undersupplied housing market.
Okay, and this is where it gets really interesting. The analysis we reviewed brings up this powerful thought experiment. It compares housing shortages directly to road planning, and it just flips the logic we use for housing.
To show how absurd it is.
To show how completely absurd our current assumptions are.
It's a brilliant way to illustrate the point. I mean, think about how we approach roads. When we see that congestion is chronic and capacity is failing, say a town needs a new bypass, we don't just, wait around for land prices to feel right.
Yeah.
Or see if the market is ready for a new highway. We plan. We intervene. We even use eminent domain if we have to. We act because the need for that capacity is a settled question.
Okay, so now let's flip it. Let's treat roads the way we treat housing. Imagine if we decided that traffic jams should be, I don't know, celebrated as proof of demand.
Right. Look at all the drivers who want to use this road. The market is signaling its excitement.
It sounds insane.
You'd have commentators justifying these huge disabling delays as being necessary to protect the valuation of the homes built right next to the current road.
And if anyone dared to suggest, hey, maybe we should build a new lane to ease this bottleneck.
Oh, they'd be immediately slammed for distorting the existing road market.
It just sounds ridiculous.
Because it is. We would never tolerate that logic for our physical transport capacity. We demand utility from our infrastructure.
Yet, we apply that exact logic to the human capacity to simply live somewhere, stably, safely.
And that thought experiment, it just perfectly shows when and how housing stopped being seen as something that quietly supports the economy and started focusing on a completely different set of goals. Housing has slipped categories.
So what are those different aims? Can you lay them out for us?
Sure. For standard infrastructure roads, power, the aim is capacity, reliability, long-term function.
Yep.
Utility is the goal.
Okay.
For housing, the goal has quietly shifted over decades.
Mm-hmm.
It's now about protecting value, minimizing disruption, and avoiding any actions that might upset existing property owners.
Wait a minute, though. Isn't that just basic economics? I mean, for most people, their home is the biggest investment they'll ever make. Shouldn't we prioritize protecting its value?
That is the perfect question, and it gets right to the heart of the trade-off. The analysis suggests that prioritizing the protection of existing value, it necessarily leads to a systemic failure in providing new capacity.
You can't do both.
You can't maximize both. If every single policy decision has to avoid disrupting the value of existing homes, then the resulting restrictions, things like mandatory large lot sizes or restrictive zoning,
Lengthy approval processes.
all of that, it all intentionally caps supply.
So protecting value becomes a policy choice that basically starves the system of new capacity.
Precisely. And that distinction utility versus value protection, that is the entire thesis of this deep dive. It explains why we tolerate outcomes that would be, just absolutely unacceptable in any other infrastructure sector.
And as one of the papers points out, the power of reclassifying this is that if housing is infrastructure, we stop shrugging at shortages. Because if we apply that infrastructure mindset, we stop looking at a shortage of homes as a sign of a vibrant market.
Yeah.
And we start looking at it as what it is, a system failure.
A failure of the system itself.
Yeah.
A shortage of clean water is a failure, not market feedback.
Right.
A power outage is a problem that requires immediate, aggressive intervention, not interesting price discovery that might lead to an innovation 5 years from now.
But we've somehow learned to just live with permanent housing shortage. We spend all our energy explaining it away instead of fixing it.
Right, instead of mobilizing to fix the actual underlying capacity issue.
So changing the category, it doesn't magically build 1 million homes tomorrow.
No.
But it changes the questions we're allowed to ask, and that's maybe the necessary first step to finding a solution.
It fundamentally reframes the issue. If you adopt this infrastructure mindset, you stop asking the old circular question, why won't people build more, even with all this demand?
Because that question assumes the system is working.
It does. The new question becomes, why are we, as a society, allowing this basic need to remain chronically undersupplied?
That shifts the focus completely, away from blaming individual builders or, consumers.
And onto the systemic barriers. Instead of telling people who are struggling that they need to make better choices, we start to notice that the choices available to them are the problem.
And this, of course, brings up the biggest sticking point when this idea comes up.
The fear.
The fear that reclassifying housing as infrastructure means what? nationalizing everything, eliminating the private market.
Right. Does the state build everything now? But the analysis is really clear that calling housing infrastructure does not mean the state has to build every single home.
Or that private ownership just vanishes.
Not at all. We already have successful mixed systems where public planning and private delivery work together. I mean, think about the energy grid.
Or public health.
That's a great analogy. Public regulation sets the baseline: safety, reliability, universal access.
But private companies are the ones actually building the generators, running the lines, managing the delivery.
Precisely. The existence of a strong public baseline doesn't stop private activity. In fact, it stabilizes the whole system. It allows private developers to focus on specialty markets, luxury markets, niche things, instead of having the crushing burden of supplying the entire foundational need for everybody.
And it's critical to remember, for a huge chunk of the population stuck in the rental market, ownership was never a realistic next step anyway, not even before the recent price hikes.
Exactly. So when the state provides this baseline of stability and capacity, it's not replacing a private choice that person was about to make. It's stabilizing a situation that was already incredibly precarious, a situation leading to homelessness, crowding, all kinds of strain.
So it supports a system that failed the most vulnerable first and is now failing the middle class. So what does this all mean? I think the most striking takeaway for me is that the debate isn't really about if the state should be involved in housing. The source material is very clear that the state is already involved. Every single day.
Deeply involved through restrictive zoning, through tax policies, through these long, complex approval processes, through costly subsidies that just try to patch holes in the market. The argument is that the state is involved right now just expensively, indirectly, and often too late.
So the real question then is, what would it look like to plan for housing with the same seriousness we plan for capacity in our major utilities, our roads, our water? Once you ask that question honestly,
Right.
just, shouting louder at the current broken system starts to feel a little beside the point.
It does. You realize you have to shift the underlying operating principle of the whole thing.
And that shift is huge.
It is. The current system's focus on protecting value over building capacity. It's created a situation where any serious attempt to boost supply feels like a direct financial attack on the biggest asset most people own.
Which is the biggest political hurdle.
It's the whole game. The discussion really has to shift toward, okay, how do we move forward and provide the capacity we need without financially breaking the people who are already inside the existing system? That is the incredibly complex challenge that's waiting for us right after we finally make that category shift.